You're a virgin who gets pregnant. What happens next? At 22 years old, my identity was built on a foundation of carefully laid plans. I was a top student, a dedicated girlfriend, and a fact that was a quiet point of pride, a college virgin. My life was a straight line, every step calculated, every outcome anticipated. So, when a wave of bone-deep fatigue and rolling nausea washed over me during the intense pressure of finals week, I dismissed it as the predictable outcome of my survival strategy. Too many late nights fueled by lukewarm coffee and greasy takeout from Panda Express. It was a simple equation of cause and effect. The last thing I could have possibly imagined, the absolute last thing, was finding myself in a cold, sterile room, staring at a grainy black and white screen as an ultrasound technician pointed to a tiny, flickering pulse. "There's the heartbeat," she said with a professional cheerfulness that felt like a slap. "You're about 8 weeks along." I heard a laugh and realized it was coming from me. A sharp, incredulous sound. I started to explain that she'd clearly mixed up my chart with someone else's, that there had been a profound mistake. But my words died in my throat when I saw the doctor's expression. It shifted in an instant from routine pleasantry to sharp, focused alarm. He immediately ordered a cascade of tests, his voice low and urgent. For the next several hours, I was a human pincushion, giving blood, urine, submitting to exams that felt increasingly invasive and surreal. And every single result came back as a screaming confirmation of the impossible. My hormone levels, my thyroid function, every biological marker was that of a perfectly healthy, pregnant woman. The science was irrefutable. My reality was not. The conversation with my mother was the first crack in the foundation of my world. We sat at our kitchen table, the same one where I'd done homework for years, and I tried to explain the unexplainable. Her face, usually a source of comfort, became a mask of cold disappointment. She didn't believe me. Not for a second. "Just tell us who the father is," she said, her voice laced with the same weary resignation she'd used when I was 16 and had lied about a party. It was the voice of a mother who believed her daughter was a liar, and it shattered something deep inside me. My father, my quiet rock, just sat there, his silence a heavy, suffocating blanket of judgment. He wouldn't even look at me. The betrayal was immediate and absolute. My boyfriend, Patty, was my last hope. Initially, he was supportive, holding my hand and telling me we'd figure out, that it had to be a lab error. But as days turned into a week with no logical explanation, his support curdled into suspicion. His questions became a relentless interrogation. "Are you sure you don't remember everything? Maybe you blacked out at that party a few months ago?" He'd press, his eyes searching my face for a confession. "Maybe you forgot someone?" He was inventing scenarios, parties I'd never attended, alcohol I'd never drunk, trying to force my reality to fit his understanding of the world. The trust between us, once so effortless, became a toxic fog. I became so desperate to prove my own sanity that I descended into a state of hypervigilance. I bought a small camera and began recording myself sleeping, convinced that I must be living some kind of secret life, a dark, amnestic twin who emerged when I closed my eyes. Each morning, I'd scan the footage with a racing heart, searching for evidence of my own betrayal. There was nothing but hours of me tossing and turning in a restless, anxious sleep. My paranoia escalated. I let Patty smell my breath every single morning to prove I hadn't been drinking. I gave him the passwords to my phone and my email, laying my entire life bare in a desperate plea for him to believe me. But it was no use. The doubt had taken root in his eyes, and it was poisoning everything we had built. I finally hit a breaking point and walked into a police station, my hands shaking as I begged them to perform a full toxicology screening and a physical exam. I needed an official document, something concrete, that would prove I wasn't lying. The officers looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion, but they eventually agreed. A few days later, the report came back. It was completely clean. There were no drugs, no alcohol, no signs of anything. A small, twisted part of me was almost disappointed. An assault, while horrific, would have at least been an answer. This clinical, sterile nothingness was its own kind of terror. The medical mystery only deepened. The genetic specialists I was seeing attempted to run DNA tests on the fetus, but the results that came back were a cascade of baffling errors. The first lab report called the sample corrupted. The second attempt was deemed inconclusive. Finally, after a third try, a senior lab technician called me directly, his voice strained. He admitted they had never seen a genetic sequence like it. They couldn't even definitively confirm that the DNA was 100% human. The phone slipped from my trembling fingers and clattered to the floor. The world around me felt thin, unreal, like a movie I was watching from a great distance. How could my own body betray me so profoundly? The social fallout was swift and brutal. My life, once so small and manageable, became a public spectacle. The story of the virgin pregnancy spread through my college campus like a wildfire. People would stop and stare, whispering just loud enough for me to hear. My employer, a small accounting firm where I interned, called me into a meeting. My boss, a man who had previously been a mentor, couldn't look me in the eye as he explained that some clients were uncomfortable with this situation. He suggested I take an indefinite, unpaid leave of absence. In the span of a week, I had lost my reputation, my relationship, my family's trust, and now my income. The weight of it all was crushing. I was crying in a coffee shop, trying to have one last, desperate conversation with Patty, when the nightmare took another surreal turn. A man I had never seen before, tall, thin, with greasy hair and an unsettling intensity in his eyes, walked directly up to our table. He didn't hesitate. He looked at me and recited, as if from a script, "I am the father of your child." Before I could even process his words, he continued, "Remember? We hooked up at that party. You were wearing that black dress. We talked about Netflix." Patty exploded. The sound of his chair scraping violently against the floor made every head in the cafe turn. His face was a mask of pure rage and vindication. "You are either a liar or you are insane," he screamed, his voice cracking. And then he was gone, walking out of the cafe and out of my life. I was left alone, staring at this stranger who was now trying to sit down. He pulled out his phone and started filming me, trying to coax me into admitting I knew him. A primal fear took over. I scrambled out of the booth and ran, but he followed me down the street, his phone still pointed at me. Finally, in a moment of sheer panic, I just started screaming, "This man is trying to touch my butt." The absurdity and the volume of my shouts finally made him run away. But the damage was done. By the next morning, a video of the incident was circulating online. My dad, who had been my last thread of hope for family support, stopped returning my calls. The encounter was all the proof social services needed. They launched a full, formal investigation into my fitness as a mother. A grim-faced caseworker named Mrs. Gable came to my tiny apartment for a home visit. She inspected every corner, her pen scratching across her clipboard. Her questions were sharp and loaded, designed to trip me up. "Who are your friends? Where do you go at night? Have you had any mental health evaluations?" I watched her, and at one point, I caught a glimpse of her notes. The words burned into my memory. Subject appears delusional. Potential harm to child. My world had shrunk to the four walls of my apartment. Genetic specialists from Johns Hopkins, one of the most prestigious medical institutions in the country, were flown in. They treated me less like a patient and more like a fascinating puzzle, subjecting me to a battery of experimental tests that had never been performed on a human before. They spoke in jargon I couldn't understand, their faces betraying a mixture of excitement and bafflement. The final, crushing blow came from my mother. Protesters, fueled by online conspiracy theories, had found her address. They stood outside her quiet suburban home with signs that called me a liar and a sinner. The shame was too much for her to bear. She called me, her voice cold and dead, and told me not to contact her again. I was 7 months pregnant, utterly alone, and my savings were almost gone. The choice before me was stark and horrifying. Keep a baby that had been the catalyst for the complete destruction of my life, give her up for adoption to strangers, or terminate the pregnancy, a thought that, despite everything, felt like a betrayal of the tiny, innocent life inside me. The anomalous DNA results were eventually leaked to a tabloid blog, adding fuel to the fire. The theories ranged from me being part of a secret government experiment to carrying an alien hybrid. I stopped going online. I stopped answering the phone. When the time came to give birth, I was terrified of what I might see. But when she was born, after hours of agonizing labor, she was perfect. Devastatingly, infuriatingly normal. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair, and a healthy, robust cry. The complete and utter absence of any explanation was the cruelest torture of all. In the quiet of the hospital room, I studied her for hours, searching her tiny, peaceful face for a sign, a clue, something otherworldly that would make sense of the chaos. But all I saw was my baby. 2 hours later, A figure appeared in the doorway. It was my dad. He was holding a large, fluffy teddy bear and he couldn't meet my eyes. He just stood there for a long moment, the silence thick with unspoken words. Finally, he looked at my daughter, asleep in the bassinet, and his face softened. "She deserves a family," he said, his voice thick with emotion. It was the first kind thing I had heard in months, and it broke me. I started to cry, and he walked in and hugged me. That day, he moved into my tiny studio apartment. He took the lumpy couch without complaint and became my silent, steadfast partner in the exhausting marathon of newborn care. He would take the night feedings, change diapers, and hold the baby while I showered, all while meticulously, painfully, avoiding the one question that hung between us like a ghost. We built a new, fragile routine, a life of unspoken truths and shared responsibilities. The world outside didn't exist. It was just the three of us against the silence. It was about 6 weeks into this new life, while I was sorting through a mountain of medical bills that made my stomach clench, that I looked over and saw him staring at the baby with an expression I had never seen before. It was a look of profound, almost painful recognition. "What is it?" I asked, my voice quiet. He seemed to snap out of a trance. He looked at me, and his voice was a low murmur. "She has your grandfather's eyes." The comment seemed innocent, almost sweet, except for one glaring fact. My grandfather had died in a car accident years before I was born. I had never seen a single photograph of him. My dad realized to slip the moment the words left his mouth. He tried to laugh it off, saying he was just tired, but the tremor in his voice sent an icy chill down my spine. The incident planted a seed of suspicion that grew with each passing day. The next morning, I woke up early to the sound of him whispering urgently into his phone in the kitchen. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was hushed and desperate. The moment he saw me in the doorway, he froze and muttered, "I told you never to contact me," before abruptly hanging up. My heart hammered against my ribs. The fragile peace of our little apartment was a lie. I walked straight to him. "Who was that, Dad?" My voice was shaking, but I forced it to be steady. "And what did you mean about Grandpa's eyes?" He wouldn't look at me. He busied himself at the counter, his movements stiff and unnatural. "You misheard me, honey," he said, his voice too casual. "I said she has your mother's eyes." His hands were shaking as he picked up a coffee mug. "No," I said, my voice rising. "You said grandfather." "I heard you." He started bouncing the baby in her seat, even though she was quiet. "You're just tired and stressed, sweetheart. Maybe you should go rest." The condescension in his voice, the blatant gaslighting, made something inside me snap. "Stop lying to me," I yelled, and the baby started to fuss. "Who keeps calling you?" He finally looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw raw, unfiltered fear in my father's eyes. It's people," he stammered, the words rushing out. "They're calling about the pregnancy. They say they know something, but they're just crazy people." He was still lying. I could see it in the way his eyes darted away, refusing to meet mine. "You have one chance, Dad," I said, my own hands trembling now. "Tell me everything. The truth. Or you need to leave." The words felt like broken glass in my mouth. I needed him desperately, but I needed the truth more. He sagged, as if his strings had been cut, collapsing onto the couch and pulling the baby into his lap. "Please don't make me go," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I can't tell you everything. Not yet. But I swear to you, I am trying to protect you. There are things about our family, things you don't know." That night, sleep was a forgotten luxury. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh from the couch where my dad slept, sent my mind spiraling. I was living with a man who held the key to my entire ordeal, and he was refusing to unlock the door. I decided I couldn't wait for him to give me the truth. I had to take it. The next morning, after he left for the grocery store, I called Brody Hensley, the legal aid lawyer whose card the clinic had given me months ago. I explained the situation, my voice low and rushed. "My dad is hiding something about my pregnancy, and I'm worried he could be a threat to my custody." Saying it aloud made me feel sick with guilt, but Brody was calm and professional. He told me to come in that afternoon, and in the meantime, to document everything. Every strange conversation, every phone call, every lie. Write it down. Social services is still watching you. Any perceived instability could be used against you. He handed me a notebook and showed me how to use a voice recording app on my phone. "You're not spying," he said gently, seeing the conflict on my face. "You're protecting your daughter." Back home, the air was thick with tension. Every conversation felt like a performance. I would secretly start the recording app before asking him a question, my heart pounding with a mixture of guilt and desperation. For days, I captured nothing but mundane chatter. Then, one afternoon, while changing the baby's diaper, he said it again. "She really does have your grandfather's nose, too." I froze. "Dad," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I have never seen a single picture of Grandpa. You know that." He went pale, fumbling with the diaper tabs. "They're in old albums," he mumbled, refusing to meet my eyes. "Somewhere." The next time he went out, I conducted a forensic search of his meager belongings. I went through his single suitcase, under the couch cushions, in the bathroom cabinet. Nothing. A quick Google search of my grandfather's name produced only a 32-year-old obituary. No photo. No details. Just a name and a date. I confronted him the moment he walked in the door, holding up my phone with the obituary on the screen. "Where are the photos, Dad?" His excuses were pathetic and transparent. "They're in storage at your mother's house." We both knew it was a lie. My investigation hit a wall, but my resolve hardened. I found a support group for single mothers that met in a church basement. For the first time, I was in a room with women who understood the exhaustion and the fear. One woman, a veteran of a brutal custody battle, showed me her custody binder. It was a massive, 3-ring binder, meticulously organized with color-coded tabs for everything: medical records, receipts for diapers, printed text messages, a daily parenting journal. It was a weapon, and I knew I needed one too. I spent the next week building my arsenal. I photographed every receipt, logged every feeding, and started a new section in my notebook titled "Dad's Suspicious Behavior," detailing every cryptic comment and secretive phone call. My lawyer, Brody, called with an update. Patty had finally been served with court papers for a paternity test, but was refusing to sign. When my dad overheard me on the phone, he became strangely agitated. "Why are you dragging him into this?" he demanded, his voice louder than I'd heard it in months. "You're just making things worse. You know he can't be the father." The fear in his eyes was back, mingled with a desperate anger. That night, I pretended to be asleep on the couch and heard him in the bathroom, his voice a low, urgent murmur on the phone. I couldn't make out the words, just the pleading tone and a single, chilling phrase before the toilet flushed. "Not yet." The pieces were all there, a terrifying mosaic I couldn't yet assemble. My baby developed a sudden, high fever, and we rushed to the emergency room. The hospital was a blur of beeping machines and worried faces. The moment the pediatrician pulled up my daughter's chart, her entire demeanor changed. I saw her whispering to a nurse, glancing at us with wide, troubled eyes. They took what felt like a gallon of blood from her tiny arm. I saw Dad in the hallway, his back to me, whispering frantically into his phone. He claimed it was a call from work, but his hands were shaking too badly for me to believe him. The fever broke on its own, but they insisted on keeping us overnight for observation. I overheard 2 residents outside our door talking about our case, about the corrupted DNA results, and how the genetics department wanted new samples. The next morning, a genetic counselor named Gianna Figueroa walked in. She was different. She was kind. She spoke to me, not at me. She explained they wanted to run more advanced tests, mentioning a rare condition called chimerism, where a person can have 2 sets of DNA. It was the first plausible scientific explanation I had heard. She gave me her direct cell number, a small act of kindness that felt monumental. Days later, Gianna called. My own DNA results had come back completely normal. No chimerism. But then she dropped a bombshell. The original lab that had handled my prenatal tests had a documented history of contamination issues and was currently facing a class action lawsuit. It wasn't a supernatural event. It was potentially human error. The court date for Patty's DNA test arrived. The air in the small collection room was thick with hostility. Patty and his parents sat on one side, me on the other. His mother watched the nurse swab my crying baby's cheek with the eyes of a hawk, muttering the word entrapment, just loud enough for me to hear. 2 agonizingly long weeks later, a certified letter arrived from the lab. My hands shook so violently I could barely tear the envelope open. My dad stood in the kitchen, pretending to wash dishes, his back ramrod straight. I scanned past the legal jargon, my eyes finding the bottom line. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Matched to Patrick James Sullivan. My brain refused to process it. It was impossible. We had never had sex. Not once. Not ever. I read it 5, 6, 7 times. The number stared back at me, unwavering and absolute. I fumbled for my phone and called Gianna, the words spilling out of me in a frantic, choked sob. It says Patty is the father, but that's impossible. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, Gianna's calm voice cut through my panic. I want you to think carefully, she said gently. Were you ever intimate in other ways? Even without actual intercourse? My face burned with shame as I recounted our careful, fumbling explorations, how we had always stopped before it went all the way. She listened patiently, and then she explained it. It's a phenomenon called splash conception, she said. It's incredibly rare, statistically almost a 1 in a million event, but it is medically documented. Pregnancy can occur, in very rare circumstances, from direct contact with pre-ejaculate. The world, which had been tilted on its axis for 9 months, suddenly snapped back into place. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't a curse. It wasn't a lie. It was just a freak accident of biology, a perfect storm of tiny, improbable events. The relief was so profound, so total, that it felt like a physical weight lifting from my chest. I collapsed into sobs, clutching my baby to my chest. Dad rushed over and wrapped his arms around both of us. I knew it, he whispered into my hair. I knew she was meant to be here. I sent a photo of the results to Patty's lawyer. A meeting was arranged. Patty sat across from me in a sterile conference room, looking pale and tired. He apologized. He said the whole thing was so far beyond his comprehension that he had reacted badly. He accepted the results and had already set up a monthly child support payment. He wasn't ready to be a father, he said, but he would be financially responsible. I accepted his terms, too exhausted to fight for anything more. The final pieces fell into place with a quiet finality. The social services case was officially closed. My old boss, facing a discrimination lawsuit, offered a settlement. It was enough to cover my medical bills and give me a cushion. Then one evening, my dad finally told me the truth. The secret calls were from his estranged brother, Frank. Years ago, their sister, my aunt, had gone through a similar, inexplicable pregnancy. It was a rare genetic anomaly that ran in their family, something that made the women susceptible to these highly improbable conceptions. My dad was so ashamed of what he saw as a family curse that he had promised his parents he would never speak of it. He was trying to protect me in his own flawed, misguided way. The mystery was solved. The truth was just a combination of bad luck, lab mistakes, and weird biology. My life had been torn down to the studs, but I was slowly rebuilding. My mom eventually reappeared at my door, not with an apology, but with a bag of groceries. She held her granddaughter for the first time, and I saw tears in her eyes. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. We were a broken, messy family. But as I watched my daughter sleep, her tiny chest rising and falling in the quiet of our small apartment, I knew we would be okay. We had survived the impossible.